There we go. We are live. We are live and ready to go. We'll just give it a second for people to log in and join us, and then we'll be able to kick off. Alrighty, we've got some people logging in nice and early starters. Good to see. So as people are logging in, what we'll do is we'll just set the scene for today's event, and sort of give people context on why we're here and who we are and all that sort of stuff. So firstly, thank you for joining us, everybody. My name's Owen Richards. I'm the founder and CEO of Air Marketing. I'm joined today by two people who are going to help me discuss a topic that we're all very passionate about. I've got Greg Freeman with me. Greg is the VP of Revenue at Clean.ai, and I have Neil Clark, who's the Commercial Director at Air Marketing as well. Gents, welcome to the discussion today. How are things?
Yeah, great, mate. Absolutely brilliant. Hectic, but I kind of hate people who say they're busy. So just hectic, but hectic in a pretty good, fun way. So yeah, absolutely great at our end.
Neil, raring to go?
Raring to go. I echo that with Greg. We're always busy, aren't we? So I think we could just say there's lots going on.
Brilliant. Lovely stuff. Well, look, guys, if you are watching this, give us a comment. Tom, hello. Tom Phillips, afternoon all. Tom from Safeguard Global is joining us. There we go. It even pops up on the screen just to let us know who's around, which is fantastic. Love it. Well, look, we have got a comment section. So if you're watching this, say hello, tell us where you're from, tell us what company you're from, tell us where you're from in the world. But I think more importantly, if you have questions as we're going through this is designed to be a pretty open discussion. We've got a bit of a talk track that we're aiming towards, but as questions come in, we are more than happy to throw them at each other and make sure that we cover off the things that are most important. In terms of the topic, we are talking today about the planning phase, the planning phase before you build out an internal sales function. Both Greg and his business and we at Air see this all the time, where people make the assumption that in order to build out an internal sales function, SDR function, prospecting, inside sales, whatever you want to call it in your industry, what we need to do is hire some salespeople, give them a phone, and off they go. And it can work, but more often than not, it won't. And I think what we're trying to do today is cover off some of those things that people don't think about, or maybe they do think about, but they don't put enough value on, to make sure that if you are going to embark on that journey, or maybe you've already embarked in it and you want to step back and just fill some boxes that you maybe didn't do first time around, or maybe you've embarked on it and it's not working anywhere near as well as you'd like it to work. Perhaps some of the things that we can talk about today will drive some thoughts around things that you can do to fix those problems, and to make sure that if you are going to go and do this, you do it well and you do it properly. Because like anything, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. So that's the topic. We're looking at people who may be founders who want to do this. So Series A founders are going to grow the team. Maybe it's people that haven't been funded at all, but they've been doing this outsourced for years and they want to put it in-house. And they're thinking that it's just going to move across nice and easily. Maybe it's people that are, as I say, they've got a couple of people, but they want to scale that as the year goes by this year. But if you're looking at hiring and bringing on people internally for an outbound prospecting or SDR role, then hopefully we'll cover the important things today. At the end of the session today, there will be some takeaways. We have two things that you can get from today. One of them is a cold calling script messaging template, which is a guide to writing it. And another is a forecasting tool, which is a really useful tool that we use in our discussions with potential clients, that will allow you to forecast out not just what you should expect from a revenue perspective, but also how much it's going to cost you to run a program, often the bit that people overlook or massively underestimate. Before we get into it, Greg, I know you today have got a little bit of a shout out you want to do, so I'm going to hand to you just to do that before we get stuck into the conversation, if that's okay.
Oh, thanks, Owen. It's like I set you up for that.
It is.
So, if you like what you hear today about how we plan and how we hire, we are currently hiring for anywhere between kind of like 6 and 9 SDRs at the moment in central London at Liverpool Street. We love people who come from non-SaaS backgrounds. Our most recent successful hire was from selling school uniforms beforehand. So if you want to get into the SaaS industry in a company that's growing really fast, do give me a shout, connect on LinkedIn or whatever, and we'd love to speak to you. Thanks, Owen.
That's all right. I'm sure it will come up again in the conversation. Love it.
Right.
So it might do. So guys, without further ado, let's get into this conversation because there's so much we can cover. So let's just take ourselves to the point at which somebody is at, and let's just assume a scenario where I'm a business owner, or maybe I'm the first sales hire, whatever, somebody that needs to grow out a team that's going to fill top of funnel, outbound, cold calling, cold email links. It's going to be all sorts of conversations today. But let's say we've made that decision. We are going to build an in-house sales team. Doesn't matter why. What do we do first? Where do we start? Neil, I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right. What are the first things that go through your mind when I say we've made that decision? We're around a boardroom table. What are the first flags for you?
First thing for me is maths. Is making sure that we're building out and working through all the maths. Sales is quite often seen as an art, and we'll bring people in and suddenly magic will happen. And as you touched on, actually, if you look at sales cycle, if you look at your average value, if you look at all that, you have to make sure that the maths stack up, and that you are budgeting it for the term that requires. So for me, it's the Excel spreadsheet work of just doing that due diligence, because out of that gives you the touchstone of which you can then set and base targets, work backwards to know what kind of targets from activity levels need to look like, and making sure it's right. Because if it's a new function, typically it means that either it hasn't been done, someone else has been doing it, you may be adding another link into your sales cycle or adding another channel. So you need to understand how that all stacks up. So yeah, I think the first thing is for me to get really underneath the numbers.
Yeah, I mean that's an absolutely brilliant point, to be honest, and it's something that I think I definitely could have done better actually when I started at Clean. I've recently been doing some really positive work with Gavin Sumner at Scalewise, all around this side of stuff, and that's been such a good experience for me personally in our business, because getting those numbers right is really the model that allows you to know when you can afford to hire, when you should be hiring, when you shouldn't be hiring. And if you don't know that, you've really not got anything to work from. And you can't always live by model, but it does really help to get the numbers set first, of whether you top down or bottom up it or both, and work out where it meets in the middle is probably the best way to do it. I suppose the other thing, especially if we're talking from that founder side of things, is go speak to people who understand sales. Very rarely do founders genuinely understand sales, especially product founders in SaaS, product-led people. They don't know what they're hiring for. Something that I have said previously and said on another of these sessions with Owen, salespeople are really good at selling bullshit. So be really, really careful that you don't get sucked in by somebody who's got an average pass but sells themselves really well. Go speak to people about exactly what your type of business needs, what the expectation should be, what you should be looking for your first hire to look like, to feel like, to know, to be able to do, and already have done, because that's going to be the thing that's massively, massively going to set you up for success or failure, I think.
I love that. I think that's a really good point. And I think back to Neil's point on the numbers, it's interesting, Greg, to hear you say it's something you could have done better last year when you started as first sales hire. Part of it's about that should have been part of the decision-making process. So probably before the decision was made, because how many people do we speak to, Neil, where actually they come to us wanting to build an SDR team, whether it's in-house or externally, but actually the numbers don't stack up. It's just too high a cost per acquisition on outbound to make that work. And they're an inbound business. So building an SDR team, unless you've got a great demand function, just doesn't make sense. And I think, probably it's something that needs to come pre that point. But let's just assume for now that it's right. The numbers stack up. And I would argue that the perception around numbers stacking up needs to be talked about at some point in this discussion, because do they need to stack up in 3 months or 3 years is a very different thing. And are they stacking up against your volume targets or profitability targets? Is it scale? Is it revenue, land grab you're after? Or is it profitability? Those two things will give you very different views. But let's look at, I guess, the things that you would do next. So you've made the decision you're going to do it. The numbers stack up. Now you're going to define your strategy. So you're going to start to think about, what do I need to do? I'll go with the first one, Greg. I'm going to come to you because I know it's your passionate topic. The first thing is a first sales hire. If you're not the first sales hire and it's founder-led, and of course, this person might be a first sales hire already, so this might be them. But let's say it is founder-led. Just synopsis, because I know you and I could talk about this for hours. Synopsis, what are some of the key things you need to think about when you're thinking, I've got to hire that first person?
Yeah, I mean, it is my favorite topic, and it's such a difficult one to assess. And in a way, like, getting it right, it's kind of like almost like unicorn breed in a sense, because you're looking for somebody who is strategically aware enough that if it does work out, they're going to be able to kind of scale up from quite a bare starting point. They've been strategic enough to actually come in, realize that founders rarely know who they should be selling to, that they've rarely got their ICP sorted, and do that side of things. But they've also got a keenness to be hands-on. I mean, we talk about the idea of hiring SDRs, and I'm fundamentally against the junior hire, as I've kind of said on LinkedIn previously. I don't think it sets the just hiring an SDR as a 20-something straight out of uni and being like, go sell stuff for us. It's just not fair on that person, if not even the business. But from the perspective of when we are looking at that person, they've got to go back to being that SDR. They've got to go back to hitting the phones, building contact lists out, and finding that person who can do the strategy, but also do the hard yards and the grind for what could be 6 months, 12 months. 12 months later, I mean, I joined Clean 12 months ago. We've grown the commercial team from 1 to 11 in that time. It'll be nearly 20 in the next few months. I still have to sell. I still have to close every day. I still have to, you don't just get to step away. It's not that easy and that fun in that sense. So you need to find that person who can show you, and I don't know, test that, get them to do cold calls for you. If they're not willing to do a cold call for you right there and then, they're probably not going to be willing to do them when they've actually got money on the line and doing it for your business. Get them to do the actions that are important, but then also get that help and that support from advisors to work out whether the strategy they're suggesting is actually the right one as well, because it's marrying up those things.
Neil, any thoughts on that sort of first hire piece?
I think the first hire, just thinking about that, one thing I thought is, for me, it was the realization that of a conscious compromise. What are you willing to coach or train? Or, if you want that perfect SDR, that perfect salesperson, assuming that within the period that you're willing to recruit for, because at the end of the day, you need to be hitting budgets. You want them to be in by a certain time. You can't wait forever for the perfect person to come along. What are the conscious compromises that you're willing to make? They fulfill 6 of the criteria, 3 or 4 of them they're not so strong at, but that's fine, because that's what we're willing to. So I think the potential side of things, I'm probably slightly on the other end of the spectrum than Greg. It's about bringing people in with the attributes and the potential to then lay on the strategy. So that might be slightly different industry, or slightly more generic in that term. But what are you willing to bend on? What are you willing to flex on? Because you open the door to applicants and have some really interesting applicants that don't always jump off the CV.
Yeah. I said we'd be pretty fluid in this discussion, and if questions come in that are relevant to where we are, I'll post them, and if they're less relevant to the discussion where they are, I'll save some of them to the end. Greg, there's one directly for you here from Guy Rubin. It says, how many of those 11 people are revenue generating 12 months in? I think that's a pretty quick one to answer, so I'll throw it at you.
Oh, let's not. I could harp on about define revenue generating for me, but I won't. So actually, I believe that SDRs revenue generate, if I'm honest, but to give you the breakdown of that's me as kind of leading the org, 1 full-time AE. 2 people in CS or after sales or growth, 1 in marketing and 6 in the SDR team at the moment, including the head of SDR. So we've got somebody reporting in, and then obviously we're adding a ton more SDRs, and we run a completely organic model. So our SDRs become senior SDRs, team leads, AEs, etc. Because I think it's important that you give your SDRs that opportunity for growth. So yeah, technically I think it's about 1.5 of those people are revenue generating after 12 months.
Brilliant. And I'm going to throw one more question. I've got 4 so far, so I'll save the other 2 for a bit later. Tom, who was first in earlier with a comment, do you think that it's easier to train a blank page new salesperson or somebody potentially from a different industry coming across? Greg, you've already touched on that in terms of you had somebody coming from out of industry. Neil, we have that all the time. Neil, do you want to kick off? What's easier, a new person or somebody with experience but different experience?
Faster to get as a perception up is probably someone from a different industry, because they're very used to handling those types of picking up the phone. How aligned it is to your culture, to your messaging, to your persona, then it's that compromise. If you've got something where it's going to be pretty quick to ramp up, then you can make that choice. And I think you look at the experience, you maybe look at where there's other attributes at play that I'm sure we go on to, picking out what else is in that person's CV and experience. Is it where are the achievements inside and outside work, from a perspective. So if it's speed of getting up with the number of calls you need to make, with the drive, probably different industry, recruitment, estate agency, those kind of areas where it's relatively driven. But if you're looking to drive someone on a cultural persona messaging, then I think you could consider someone as a blank page. I would say that you're possibly looking at a greater drop off with a completely new, untested person. So what you run the risk of there is you put a lot of effort, and what are the additional cost side. You could put a lot of effort into someone and they find that they don't like it, it's not for them. So that probably has a big play.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that for me is a massive one. So like in the early, when you're trying to build that culture within the team, like optimize for reduction in risk. And for me, the biggest risk with an SDR is they don't like cold calling, so they walk away from it. In essence, that for me, like if you're any good as a business, you can coach people, you can train people who have got a solid background to be successful. Actually, if they just won't pick up the phone because they hate that sense of rejection, that feeling of interrupting people's day, you'll never win, kind of thing. So for me, with those first sets of hires, just maybe the first 4 or 5, try and get experience of at least cold calling. It doesn't matter what industry it's in. We're actually finding that it really doesn't make a difference if it's in the SaaS industry or outside of the SaaS industry at all. But do optimize to reduce risk. And then once you've built that culture that we do make 60 to 100 dials a day kind of culture, then you can bring people in. And whereas previously I've had people come in raw at graduate level early and fail, we've just taken on our first true graduate, and he booked a meeting on his 34th dial in his entire life. So like he just sat down, and because everyone else, like that's the culture now, everybody makes 60, 100, 120 dials a day. It didn't phase him. He was just like, oh, well, everyone else does it. They're not like weirdos. I should probably do it too, kind of thing. So I'd optimize for reduced risk at first, and then you can transition towards even greater emphasis on ceiling, which I think is the way that a lot of people view like raw grads as like they've got a great ceiling, let's go for it. So I'd do it through that transition.
Awesome. Lindsay, Nathan, thanks for your questions. Stick around because I will try and throw them at the guys a little bit later on if that's okay. So Greg, you touched on a point there which I think is really important, culture. And I think one of the things that a lot of people do is build out a sales team and let the culture define itself instead of being the defining factor in that. What do I want my sales culture to look like? And therefore, what type of people am I hiring to fit into that? And how does that fit into the wider business strategy? Keen to get your thoughts around that. Did you define your culture? Did you just give a framework and let it mold over the last 12 months naturally? What thought went into that before you went live?
Yeah, so when you arrive as anything in the commercial team at Clean, the first session of your training in inverted commas or your learning is a dedicated session on like the vision and the culture of the sales team. So we speak to responsibility, which is like your personal responsibility to be the best version of yourself, hit your numbers. Accountability, which is the accountability that you have to other people within the team to collaborate, to help them learn, to be a part of the bigger vision and the bigger goal, and then just loving what we do. And that for me, like there's a phrase in American football which is my favorite, my sport as it happens, which is culture over scheme every time. So get the culture right and the scheme will follow. American football is very like chess but for people hitting each other in a way. So people are very focused on like lines and drawings and making sure the plays work. But actually, if you get the culture right first, you'll ultimately be more successful. So yeah, the first thing I did was define my vision of what the culture should be and the behavior set should be with people coming into the business. And we just reiterate that from the first moment they step into the business, but also on an ongoing basis. And I would say, and I'll obviously just hand over to Neil in a sec, but the thing, and this is, I suppose, just a public shout out, the thing that has been the most defining feature of our culture is that Wes Amos, who is now our head of SDR, and Aaron Baker, who is the AE who was an SDR, have just been such like evangelists of that culture of work ethic, enthusiasm for what we do. And the two of them, like, we couldn't be where we are today as a business without them. So if you can find those two people who can come in and just buy into that, you'll really find that that's a massive part of your success moving forward. So yeah, find those people who come in and buy in.
Love that. Can I just say, Greg is also hiring SDRs. Don't know if he mentioned that earlier, but it's a good opportunity to shout it out again.
Yeah, if anyone wants to also buy in, I'm here hiring loads of SDRs. So.
Neil, can I throw this at you? I'm keen to get your thought. Right? What if an organisation isn't set up for a sales function? Because not every organisation has a culture that is suited for salespeople to sit in. And I know there are people I've spoken to in the past who say, I can't envisage, we need the sales function, but I don't know how to create the culture for a sales team to come in. Does the business need to adapt, or do we create a subculture there? And again, I think it's about defining it and making a clear choice. But any thoughts on that?
Cool, that is a tough question. Yeah, thoughts on that, because I guess we can drop into the AIR model where we effectively inhabit different clients, personas, culture to adopt that. So we try and get into every client ecosystem so that we can drive that. Some, I think, is about matching skill set, and I think that's where, if you're looking at SDR and sales function, you typically, some areas in business will require a specific person. So if we're doing an ideal profile, not just an ICP for targets, but around how do we bring and transition that person in. I mean, I'd argue that sales is as a fundamental part of every organization, and without it can't move through. So it has to be part of the DNA. It has to be something that is addressed and built out. And if the business is looking to grow, that is about multiplying and how that can grow out for the team. So I'm trying to think of an industry or an area where that would be a real issue to draw a comparison or a case study. But everywhere I've been, and everywhere that sales and marketing have been a function. Now, admittedly, there's been tension sometimes between what is marketing budget and spend and what is sales budget and spend. Do we want field sales? Do we want full service, sort of BDMs doing the full cycle sales? And how do we build out, and how do we set up the sales function? But I don't think I've ever found that there isn't a place or a cultural fit for sales.
Okay, I'm going to fire, Greg, just going to fire a question at you, if that's all right, because actually I just realised I missed it last time, but it's particularly relevant to that first sales hire. The question's from Lindsay, and she says, at what point would you imagine someone will be in their career somebody who's capable of doing both the outbound prospect calling as well as the strategy. I think I'll just leave that one with you for Greg now to get your thoughts, if that's okay.
I wouldn't define it as the point in your career, because obviously everybody goes through different stages. But if I kind of explain how I came to that point, it was kind of like my own learning in a way. So I had a sales role, I had a CS role, then I had a sales role. I'd started to do the kind of 360 sales cycle. So I'd been used to already making calls, closing deals, all those kind of things in different industries, different numbers of stakeholders. And then me and my girlfriend decided to completely shut up shop, went traveling for a year. And on that year, every time we were on a bus journey or a train journey, I was doing my own learning about the more strategic side of things. So like read predictable revenue, read from impossible to inevitable, like just was doing all this extra work to learn the strategy, so that when I got back from that year, I kind of could do both. So I think if you facilitate your own learning on the strategic side, which is the most difficult side to actually get access to, and you facilitate conversations with people who can help you with that, organizations like the Revenue Collective are very good for that. Like I've been a member of the Revenue Collective for a while, and that helps facilitate a lot of really good conversations, especially as a younger person in a leadership role in the industry. But it really does come down to, you can do the first bit because most people have to do it in their sales career, but going finding and seeking out that further mindset. And that's what we're always working on with the guys at Clean. It's like, yeah, we want you to be good at calling, and we want you to, but actually we also want you to understand what your place in an SDR model is, in an AE model, and hopefully help them that way. So yeah, go find it. Go find people who found it themselves and taught themselves that.
It's interesting because there's a window, isn't there? There's a window where in theory you're not ready to do the strategy piece, and then in theory you're kind of beyond wanting to do the prospecting piece. And I think that's a very tough challenge, and one that I would imagine many, particularly in the SME space, that need people to cross-pollinate across lots of tasks would suffer from. So I think it's a really good question.
What I'd recommend as well, if there's founders on the call, the thing that's going to make a more senior person willing to go back to picking up the phone and grinding every day is the investment they have in the future journey of the business. Like, the better the options package, the better the equity package, the more likely they are to want to pick up the phone and make you successful. So like, that's another way of doing it. Drive behaviors through the compensation package.
I suppose it also comes back to tolerance for failure as well. If you want somebody who can learn on the job and you're prepared to give 6 months longer, but they're the right cultural fit, they're prepared to roll their sleeves up, and every stakeholder has that view on it, fine, you can take somebody maybe just under the line. If you haven't got that tolerance, you probably need to be looking more for the finished product. And I think that's an interesting topic. I want to get onto some of the tangibles though. I'm moving at speed here because we've got a lot to cover. Before you go live, you've got to look at things like technology. There's so much sales tech out there right now. You're building a prospect team. You know, it's no longer an Excel spreadsheet in a phone, which it probably was 15 years ago. Neil, for you, just some of the highlight things that stand out for you that we see time and time again. What are the things that you'd be going straight to? You can't have everything. You can have 2 or 3 things in budget. What are you going to look at?
First thing is a good CRM, so that you can manage pipeline with visibility across levels. That is the absolute kind of minimum, and it's very, very difficult to be doing it lo-fi. You know, you really need. It doesn't have to be completely connected up. You know, some tech stacks have got 3, 4, 5, 6 things all interconnected. And what I would say actually is, if you're going to be building your first sales team, that's not just you doing it or someone doing it, and bringing in a sales tech stack, that's 2 things that are going to take your time, and you've just got to make sure you've got the resource to bed both of those in. So for me, a CRM is absolutely, it's where your data sits. You can see the pipeline, you can measure the time. It's got everything you need to make sure that you are building and moving that sales funnel. It's really, really key, and it keeps people on point on the strategy. You can bring in collateral into it, using and bringing stuff either side of that. You know, there's loads of sales tech. We don't need to do a big Rolodex is who can remember the most sales tech, but all the rest of the stuff around sequencing and things is fantastic and speeds things up massively. But you still need that SDR in the first place to be utilizing it. And I think we all know that you have to use it all the time. It has to be accurate. It can't be something that's optional. You're all in. Otherwise, it's just a bit. It's a shortcut on the top of your browser that you click on.
Yeah, that you never use. Greg, what were your go-tos when you started Clear? I know you went in, no SDR function, build it, Greg. What were your go-tos?
So for me, I agree with Neil. I think HubSpot's a really good fit now. I used to hate HubSpot, but now I implement it wherever I go, and it's a good balance between something that's probably too robust for a new sales team like Salesforce versus something that's maybe not quite robust enough like Pipedrive. So HubSpot can be a good recommendation, but for me, it's data and direct dials. Like the more direct dials you can get your people, the more successful they will be. Direct dials equal conversations with decision makers. A lot of what you're doing when you're implementing a sales org is learning fast. So you fail fast and you iterate. The more people you speak to, the more opportunity you've got to have conversations about what you're doing, find out that you're completely wrong about what you thought and get it right. And also when you are more right, to get it right. I've been a Cognism client for a good while now. I think Cognism have done a really good job of improving the direct dial side of things recently, and that's been powerful for us. So yeah, as much as it's obviously not about naming sales tech, but for me, HubSpot and Cognism are my two go-tos when I'm first implementing a project.
Yeah. I think it's great to give them, because actually a CRM could be anything. Like you say, there's so many options. I agree. So for me, HubSpot in a small growing business, and particularly if you're going to blend it with a demand marketing strategy, it is absolutely the right choice. And I think the reporting in it is good as well. It's maybe not the best, but it's good enough at that stage that you can make that work. I think for me, I always think about the phone system. It's a bit old fashioned, but actually the ability to know how long your calls are taking, be able to see how many calls are being made, so you're reporting on activity, and being able to ultimately listen to those conversations, coach around those conversations. Doesn't matter what you see in a CRM, it's only as good as the information put in it. Actually, if I can listen firsthand to those conversations and coach and guide and, like you said, Greg, learn, that for me is always the most powerful thing. So if I can see how much of something is happening and how well it's being done when it's happening, I've pretty much got all the information I need to, in a manual way, make some smart decisions about what I need to change. And I think that's always a really good place to start. You're right, we can talk about sequencing tools and all the sales technology in the world, but I think if you're working on where do I start, keep it simple, stupid, decent phone system, decent CRM, bit of reporting around that, good data. Those are that's what you need. Anything else above that is a bonus. But that's what you need to get started. To make sure you're doing
to be fair, HubSpot's dialer, HubSpot's new sequencing stuff is again in HubSpot sales is pretty solid. Like you probably don't need it. Like we used one of the bigger players in the cadencing and phone market.
Yeah.
And we found that HubSpot's dialer is far more trustworthy than that kind of one. So like HubSpot again can help you there on the dialer and the cadence in front for emails and tasks.
And that's just to say that's the funny one. You would talk about budget and SDR ramp up and how much time. We got to bring into that the mentality of signing off budget for sales tech, for CRMs, and it's almost a different mentality. Well, that's on a 12-month license. It's cost me X, and you just kind of park it. Whereas the SDRs, those CRMs are not insignificant budgetary wise. You've got to think about how you're using them as a blend.
And let's talk about that. So good CRM, data, you need good data and you need a quantity of data as well. Phone bill, all the rest of it. What are we talking about investment level to get this off the ground? Because I think people think you just switch it on and it's free at times. What sort of numbers do you think we're looking at? Just to say, I've got nothing, now I'm ready to go before anybody's even made a phone call or sent an email in anger.
Oh, Greg, do you want to go?
Yeah,
round arm swing. Just give me a gut instinct.
So I think the widely published figure on this for like a more established team becomes like 660 pounds per head per month in technology. I don't think you really, if you've got HubSpot plus Cognism, you're probably looking at a couple of £100 per person per head at first. Like it's finding that balance between not throwing all the technology in the world at it, and like Neil says, that's the best point of all. Buy them technology, empower them. What is the point in having someone sat there doing useless stuff that doesn't drive revenue when for another 150 quid you could empower them to be successful so they'll stay around, which means you won't lose them and therefore it won't cost you retention money. Like, yeah, it's painful to see how many people just won't invest in the technology to support the people they hire.
Do you know what's interesting, Neil? I'm going to take you back to your very first point today, which is, Greg, you talk about it in hundreds of pounds per month, which absolutely is a run rate. What you've got to remember, though, is you've got to commit to this. HubSpot don't let you run month to month. Cognism don't you've got to commit to this journey. So again, that has to be part of your forecasting and your investment conversations up front. That, guys, if we're going to do this, we're going to be doing it for at least 12 months. So if we get it wrong, we can't in the first 12 months just switch it off because we're committed to this cost line. And that makes it even more important to do those numbers right up front. And what I'd say to people is that, it's thousands. Before you get started, it's thousands, not hundreds, right? If you're going to get 2, 3, 4 people off the ground, then you should never be doing it with one. Let's just make that really clear. And I think back to your point, Greg, hiring one SDR just doesn't make sense. So you're going to do 2, 3, 4 people. You're going to give them the basics of a CRM, some data, whatever else. We are talking about in the thousands before you get started, full stop. And that's not to mention recruitment fees and all the rest of it. That's just to get technology and people bums on seats ready to go. Let's touch on data. So we've talked about Cognism. We all use Cognism. There are other data. So we use 10 or 12 different data sources. Why is data so important? Because I think we would all agree it's probably one of the most important parts of a successful outbound program. Why is that, Neil? Why is it so important?
It's identifying and bringing in the ability to what Greg said, to make a lot of calls, learn fast, fail fast, looking at the metrics of making 1,000 calls, how many conversations you're going to have with decision makers, how many leads or opportunities, and then revenue that's going to drive. So data is so critical. You spend time looking at who your ideal client, who they are. We can go out, look at those that will have budget, look at the markets, set the market that you're looking to serve, and it shortcuts all of that kind of multi-channel approach of old. Before data supply, you had to go out and drive up and down the country, or you go online and find that, and it's the velocity of conversations. It's driving that. It's pushing it into those CRMs, whether it is a HubSpot dialer or just bringing it in and being able to blow that up to get to the amount of leads or meetings or demos that you need. It's just essential, absolutely essential.
Yeah, it's Neil's again, back to his earliest point, which is like the numbers thing. Like all the numbers start at the very top with how many people can we contact, can we actually get in touch with and speak to, and but then along the way you've got like intent data, technographic data, like actually making the most of and a good use of technographic data. We are like our software integrates with tools. That's literally what it does. It extracts data from different sources and puts them into one place. So we can look at technographic data on like through Ghostery or Built With or Datanize, whatever it might be, and it really helps us write good emails, make good calls. Like, we can see you using Hotjar, using Google Analytics. We've got integrations with those. Let's get that data into a data warehouse. Like that technographic can be really good. And then intent, obviously, if people are in buying cycles or in at least research mode or the research phase with other competitors, then that's a good bit of data to find out as well. And there's so many data suppliers out there, like you say.
I think that as the final point in data, one of the things that I think is important for people to realize if they've not done this before is that what does good data look like? Because I often see people on the indefinite hunt for perfect data, and I think all three of us would acknowledge it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as perfect data. We call it fishing in the right pond. You got to make sure you're fishing in the right pond with the right bait. That's your messaging and all the rest of it. But that's your starting point. And you need to be above that line. So I know I'm fishing in the right pond, and now I learn as I go. Nobody's ever built a perfect data strategy before they've tested it. So you need to start broadly and then rein in as you go and you learn using the data. But I think what's interesting is this endless hunt for perfect data, every direct dial. Like I said, it's bonus if you get it. If you can't, make sure you've got right sector, right size, right stage, right triggers, all those sorts of things. And you've gone beyond, I want to talk to, how often is our brief, Neil? Who do you sell to? Any company? No. Who do you actually sell to? Because any company includes public sector and NHS and all the rest of it. Oh no, I don't want to sell to them. Okay, so who don't you want to sell to? Right, let's narrow it down. And it's the same with that. So you want to sell to a one-man band plumber? No, I don't. Okay, well, let's get rid of the things that we don't want to sell to. And now we're fishing in the right pond, at least by elimination. So I think there's some interesting points, on that. One of the things I'm keen to get some opinions on today, and guys, if you're watching this and you want to throw your opinion in, by all means comment, is whether first time round you should be primarily phone led. Now, okay, I'm loading this question because I know Neil's answer to this. Greg, I think I know yours too. And I certainly know my opinion, but I see so many people think, right, we're building an SDR team. We've got to get our sequences right. We've got to get our social selling strategy right. We've got to get our email personalization copy right. No, just pick up the phone, talk to people and learn from those conversations at scale. You can personalize those conversations. You can do loads of research, no research, whatever. But get in and talk to people because it is the fastest way to learn, have conversations and generate pipeline. Really quickly, 1 minute each, agree or disagree.
I don't need a minute fully agree with that. It has to be deployed and it can, it's about feedback loops. Conversations drive market intelligence and your own ICP intelligence as well. So when and where to start changing the messaging, to start using different things in there. You will know if you're going out to a market that typically will be contracted for a period. You should be able to build a fantastic, base where when people are going to look to come out of contract. So conversation fully.
Yeah, I mean, personally, like if you're in a competitive space with us, I'd really encourage you to send cookies with your name on to prospects. That'll work wonderfully for you. But for anybody who's not competing with us, really just pick up the phone loads of times, because the worst thing is that if you start out by not picking the phone up, like emails get ignored generally, LinkedIn messages get ignored generally. They definitely get ignored if your messaging's wrong and people just don't care about what you're saying, but you don't get any feedback on that because they're getting ignored. So it's the feedback loop, like Neil says, that comes with picking the phone up loads of times. And for us, 78% of our meetings are closed on the phone. So yeah, there you go. The phone is the king. Unless you want.
And your sales reps are learning and practicing and getting better. Our 2 bits of feedback in the chat session, Will Offen and Sam from Cleaning Alliances, have both said they agree as well. So we've got a consensus already of 5 people on that. And I think that's not writing off other channels as having use, but it's about being primarily phone led. And I think it sounds like we all agree on that.
And let's move on that. Sorry. All I was going to say, Greg, is right. Picking up on that. Don't put more links in the sequence than you need to. If you can have a conversation and get to the point where you've got that, is so powerful because they're ready to go. I've heard a couple of people where they're looking, someone's ready, they want to do it, and if you can empower someone and get someone to do that on that call, more links is just more opportunities for failure. They'll drop off, there'll be something will happen, they'll forget it in a couple of days. It's just so powerful. That's the only bit I wanted just to pick up on was Greg's point there was so true.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now jump in as you need to, guys. More than happy for you to do that. So let's move forward. I'm looking at somebody who's budgeting for this now. We've got a bit of a strategy. We've got we've got a data strategy. We've thought about our messaging, and we can probably debate that for at least an hour in itself as well, on how we structure a cold call. But I think we'll save that for another topic. We've got our technology sorted. We've got our first sales hire in. What do we think are the costs that people forget? So we hear all the time, why would I outsource it? It's more expensive to do it outsourced than it is internally. And often I say, well, okay, let's just step back. How much is a recruitment fee for somebody? How much time does it take to recruit somebody? What about that technology you haven't got to buy, etc.? And when we walk through, people go, geez, didn't think about those things. And I think it's not uncommon for people to skip over the things that they don't want to know about. So the big one for me is always recruitment fee. And if you're not paying a recruitment fee because you're doing it direct, it's risk of not finding that person quickly, and it's time of finding that person, advertising costs that you're not going to consider. That for me is one of the big ones that people forget about. We've touched on technology today. Anything else that you guys can think of that's like a cost that you're going to need to put out before you even start going live with your prospecting or outreach?
The biggest cost, and honestly, in that like short spiel you gave earlier about like narrowing down to a customer profile, like in terms of like spending money on outsourcing, for most businesses, if you're not charging them like millions of pounds for that process, then you're undercharging for it, because that's the bit that's going to cost them the most. Like the fact that they can't do that themselves in-house, like the cost, I mean, the biggest cost of all is the cost of failure, right? And loads of people fail at this first time, loads of people fail at the second time. So anything you can do to reduce the risk, and from what you've just described, that process that you guys obviously go through with clients probably 7, 8, 15 times a month with new clients, like that is invaluable in itself. So that shouldn't be overlooked. Recruitment fees is a big one, but I use recruiters every day. Like there's and I will say to you, and I don't know if this is going to come up anyway, but I'll take this opportunity. I put off using Wiser Elite for ages, and I don't even know why. I've said this to them. Like I did. For some reason I put it off. Lewis Gadsden at Wiser has just been excellent. Like he has such a good relationship with me. Like he just sends me WhatsApp notes, keeps me up to date with everything. He supports me on client hiring. So those recruitment fees, although they're something that people overlook and they try and avoid, they are actually like money well spent when you find the right one. So yeah, shout out to Lewis at Wiser, who is really good. Nice.
Neil, any thoughts on other hidden costs or things that people often don't think about?
No, I think I had the cost of tech, the cost of license, those kind of things that might just suddenly drop out. For me, the biggest cost is just time. Is month on month, it's going to build up, and people are going to see that as a bigger and bigger cost. You're going to set the expectation 1, 2, 3 times, but they'll still be hoping that it's going to ramp up and pick up a lot quicker, no matter how many times you set it out, which is why. So I think, for me, it's just time, being able to hold back and absorb the sort of expectation, whether it's from the board or shareholders or stakeholders, is the biggest cost that you probably don't realize. You just think you drop it in and it will be nice and free flowing.
And it's those ongoing things. So HubSpot did a report that said, I think it was only 80% of reps' time was spent outside of internal meetings. So that's your maximum selling capacity if there's nothing else. So, you factor it in and you're automatically losing 13% of your week just on internal meetings for the average sales rep. And it's that kind of stuff that I think when you're forecasting and you're building out the year that you don't think of, that a rep might work 5 days a week, but they're only working 46 weeks a year because they've got annual leave and bank holidays, and you're forecasting them for 50 weeks, all that sort of thing. Tom Phillips just got a good point. Hidden costs. Beer, wine. It's a good point. Benefits, the cost of seat, the cost of something in there. The fact that you've got to buy them a laptop, probably buy them a phone, and add that, and that's a 2-year contract. All of these things stack up, and actually, when you think about it, even to the point where people naively but genuinely say, right, I've got an SDR there, it's a 25 grand or 30 grand bait cost or whatever it is, but forget about the fact you've probably got 7-8% of that national insurance on top, and that's on top of their comms as well. But I'm only budgeting on the basic. And I think all of these things are things that come up, not to mention lost time. So if somebody's sick, they're not selling for you. Doesn't matter what it costs. It's lost time, it's lost opportunity, it's lost revenue. And I think the biggest thing here, and this is the thing that I've seen go wrong in our sales teams and sales teams I've run, but also in client sales teams in-house where we work alongside them, is the actual cost of someone doing well. Because what happens when you've got an SDR team is that people get to a point where they're proven, they're doing well, and they will do one of two things. They'll either want a promotion, and in which case you lose them from an SDR seat, or they'll leave. And those are the two possibilities. And hopefully it's a promotion and stay within the business. But either way, somewhere between 6 to 12 months with an SDR that's right at the top of your team, they will be shouting about doing other things, whether you know about, hopefully culturally you know about it, but if your culture isn't right, or for whatever reason the leader isn't right, they'll just go because they know they're worth more, and we won't be recognizing that in the same way internally. And I think the cost of replacing that person, we know the average tenure is 12 to 18 months for an SDR, replacing that person every year, that's what you've got to budget in, and that assumes that average 1 year, but actually if you're a new team, probably it's half that. You know, you're replacing people straight away. As you build out your culture, people are going to feel like it's not right. You're going to feel like they're not right, and you're working it out. That becomes more predictable over time, but in the early stages is a massive danger to ignore that. And I think that when it comes to forecasting out, if you're not overlaying those failures, and we call it tolerance for failure, you must have tolerance for failure built into your model. Don't predict that we're going to get that many calls every week, even if somebody's on holiday. We're going to generate that number of meetings, and we're going to convert them all in our average sales cycle, all at our average sales size. Assume it's going to take twice as long and cost twice as much to start with. And if it still works, it's a good decision. And that's usually the mantra that we would work on. Anything to add to that, gents?
I think the only thing I would want to say people should budget and follow through on is ongoing training, coaching, and development, which you've got to be. It gets dropped because people are good and show talent, but I think that is, so crucial. Kind of live by the rules you set type thing. Yeah, we're always going to do this, and I think that's the bit that I totally agree with you, Owen. You can have a week littered with huddles and catch-ups and all these but ultimately you want to try and free people up to do what they want to do. Free them up, get them doing stuff. But I think the coaching, the training, is it all through you? Which I question. How, what are we a qualified trainer, and how do we get that training? What do we invest in that? I mean, I'm probably assuming this is now a little further down the line rather than the first SDR hire, but worth a thought. How do you approach that, Greg? What's your thoughts on the training side?
So like we use sales, we work with Sales Impact Academy as like a secondary to our own. Like, I guess, people might think this is arrogant, but like, I don't think there's many sales training schemes that could train people better than we train people ourselves. Like, I think there's a gap. There's a massive gap in many businesses where people aren't well trained, but that is ultimately due to limitations at the top, not because of lack of training willingness, and there's obviously lack of training willingness other places. But yeah, I mean, we pretty much manage coaching ourselves, but everybody gets like dedicated coaching sessions every week. Like it's not a one-to-one to do a pipeline review. That's a separate session. It's a one-to-one to coach you on skills, do voice record it, like call recording. I am a massive endorser of SDRs working in the office, not at home, because they learn through collaboration and peer-to-peer learning. But yeah, we are very, very kind of like ongoing coaching ourselves focused. But with that in mind, and I think this is it's a very relevant point for actually where I was going to say a hidden cost that people forget when they're building the spreadsheet, is that as you do this, and like you say, Neil, we're a little bit further on from that first hire now, but like we've done well, the first one's worked, the second one worked, third, fourth, fifth. There comes a point where like you can't directly manage that many people anymore. And a hidden cost that people forget about is the layering up of hierarchy. So you forget that, like, I love Wes. He's unbelievable. He was an unbelievable SDR and he's an unbelievable head of SDR. But I didn't hand him 4 people to manage and he went, oh, I'll do that for the same money. So like it doesn't work like that, right? So and I'm sure when we promote somebody to team lead soon, they won't expect that to be the same money. So you add these layers of hierarchy, and you've got somebody who may not even be delivering meetings anymore, or they're delivering less meetings than they were before, but you're probably paying them, well, you are paying them way more than you were before. So you've got to think about that as a hidden cost as well. The hidden cost of growth and scale, RevOps, these kind of hires that start to come in as the team grows, and you need to set budget aside for.
Love that. I love that. Some amazing points there. I genuinely don't think more than half of people planning for this before they go live will consider a lot of these things. So, I mean, these are really valuable points for people. And I think when we look at that forecasting and predicting what's going to happen and that planning stage, one of the things that comes to mind here is that stakeholder management piece. So I've been in discussions before where you've got two co-founders, one's expectations are here and one's are realistic, and they're battling to negotiate on expectations. And I think what going through the process does is it takes it out. Let's just put everything in. Let's have a discussion about what needs to happen for this to just happen, not let alone work and be successful. Put it in and go back to the numbers. What do the numbers tell us? And I think when you're looking at that, when you might already have a marketing team, you might have a successful marketing team, a successful business development team who are used to closing inbound leads, and you're going to build an outbound team in an existing business. That's where I see this the most, because they're used to dealing with referrals, MQLs, inbound leads, and they overlay all of the assumptions that come from that into an outbound program, shorter sales cycles, higher conversion rates, more engagement, and they get it all wrong because they assume best case scenario on everything. And I'm keen to get your take, guys, on ramp time, pure standing start, cold outbound program. How long does it take before I can say this works?
Expectation management. My favorite topic. So yeah, to all the salespeople out there who think it sounds like it's a really cool thing to come in, build a sales team, and like founders, and actually, thankfully, Drew and Matt, who are my founders, were like probably the most realistic of anybody that I've started working with. Like they were great on this side of things. But expectation management and managing that is huge, and make sure you don't start working for any founders who expect the outbound program to kick off and you to be closing millions of pounds in the next 3 weeks, kind of thing. But I look at it as a very like cyclical thing. So the outbound program kicks off. It takes a bit of time to find its feet because of the amount of iterations that have to happen with messaging, because you're now speaking to more people, like new audiences and that kind of thing. But you should start to book, I think, good quality conversations within the first quarter. Probably going to find that they start to close in the second quarter. A couple might drop early, depending on how good your natural product market fit is. But when outbound really comes to the fore, it's probably in like at the earliest Q3, but maybe even into Q4 or Q1 the following year, when you've driven so much new awareness that people start to come back into the funnel, and they go from being a completely cold outbound in Q2 to Q1 the following year. They're inbound to you, and they're like, oh, we're sorted now. We've taken the education. And that's when that starts to really kind of layer up and compound. It's almost like a compounding feature of an outbound cycle. But yeah, I think like somewhere between months 9 and 18 is where you'll start to really see it come to the fore and become your best source of leads and revenue.
Neil, I think we concur with that. What's your take on it?
Utterly concur. I think depending on whether you're going after, logos, enterprise, you could be 12 months to 24 months. If it's mid-market SMEs, you might be looking at a shorter sales cycle, and it depends on the product or service you're selling. I was going to go 6 to 12 months, depending on whether you had a tailwind or a headwind. It really depends. I was also going to say that one thing I think, if you're feeling courageous, that you should be looking at if you're building out a sales function, is just making sure that the business has the infrastructure to support if sales flies, because that's one thing that's quite often, we want to reach for the sky. Can we deliver the sky? Well, actually, no, that's going to be a bit more. So I think just aligning that with trying to just point out to people what it means to the business, the whole infrastructure. So we're talking about layers of sales. If things go well, that applies to the rest of the business. This is how we grow to. Are we at a point where we can do that and have all of those honest conversations, not because you want to really get someone thinking big and thinking that they're going to have a global organization within a couple of years, but just honest conversation. If we grow this as big as that, can the business deliver? Does that fit what we can do?
Good.
You're smiling, Greg.
Well, Will's saying I think he meant great point, Neil, rather than great point. But I think we get the idea that it's a very, very good point. Absolutely love that. I think what's interesting here is that expectation management has been a real thing. You've all gone straight onto this point because it's an important one. I work in quarters too as well, Greg. So it's quarter one is write it off, right? If you make any kind of say in Q1, trust me, you're lucky. You're lucky. Q2 is I start to see something come through at some point, but that might be month 6, some kind of full cycle, and I start to see the process from beginning to end can work. Q3, I started to build some really good momentum, and I said, should be starting to see some success. And then Q4 is, okay, this works now. But of course, the ROI tends to come between 6 and 18 because it depends on your sales cycles. But that all assumes an average B2B sales cycle, 3 months, give or take. That sort of thing. Naturally, I think, Neil, you made a brilliant point there around that is massively changed based on whether you're selling to enterprise, size of sale, all that kind of stuff. And I think some fantastic points there. And I think anybody going into this thinking it's going to be a quick fix, my advice to you would be build at least a 2-year forecast. Probably 3, but a 2-year forecast is your absolute minimum. And trust me, 2 years will look so much better than 1. But what it does is means that if I know the milestones at Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 that feed the numbers into that profitability level at the end of Q2, I have faith in getting through those fear points where I go, oh, we're not making money, because we'll know that going up front, but it will feel different when you're 50 grand down, 100 grand down in investment or whatever the numbers are. And I think it's a very, very good point. Guys, we're getting towards the end of the session today. We're not quite there. And guys that are watching, if you've got any more questions, we're happy to stick around for 10 minutes. By all means, fire them over. I think just to wrap up, we haven't really touched much on hiring SDRs. Greg, I know you're hiring SDRs right now, in case you wanted me to mention that again.
It'd be worth mentioning.
But for somebody who maybe hasn't hired SDRs before and is looking to grow an SDR team, let's just go top 3 things. It doesn't have to be 3. If it's 4, I'm all right. If it's 2, I'm all right. But top things that you're looking for in a solid SDR. Greg, you go first.
Ambition, resilience, coachability. That's it.
Sure, you nearly had a 4th.
Yeah, I
was gonna. Slightly more relevant for us is a strong academic profile, but like that's largely frowned upon actually to have that thought. So I won't go too deep on that. But yeah, we also look for a strong academic profile because it's quite a big, meaty, complex space, but that just isn't a thing for everybody. So yeah,
it's relevant to you, might not be relevant to everybody else. So that's fair enough. Neil?
I think ambition and drive is one that you just as quickly as possible try and, if they've sent something in and they've followed it up, there's some real key ones that jump up. And also after interview, what do people do post interview? Do they drop you a note and say thanks? Do they drop you a note, say, hey, just wondered what? There's so many people that you just go, that's impressive. So ambition is, I'm going to pinch Greg's because I think that's so key. Drive. And have they shown something, whether that be sporting or in their own life outside of cricket? You're not always going to get people who are, have had a 25-year career as an SDR. So it's looking at something in there that has shown an ability to consistently approach something. So it's have you got stamina? That's something that is important to me. Have you done something which has given you, has taken a fair bit of stamina to achieve?
Love that. I'm going to add one word. Actually, I'm going to add 2, but my one that I think is the most important is integrity. I think I heard somebody say that to me a while back, and I think that's always stuck with me, that generally hiring people, looking for some level of integrity it is really important, because with integrity and somebody's honest, they'll give you feedback on where they need to get better. They'll give you feedback on things that are working well and not. And I think that's so powerful in a startup mode.
So a word which isn't built into our standard profile, but like Aaron is like, I can't speak highly enough of Aaron and his emotional IQ and stuff. he's like obsessed with the authenticity when we speak to candidates. Like, I'm not even sure how we define that, but like he'll always be like, oh, total authenticity, loved it, or like, oh, I didn't believe any of it, kind of thing. So that can be huge.
I'm going to fire one more question before I do a wrap up of that. It's all right. Really good point, Greg. Actually, I had two. The other one was cultural fit, and I think you mentioned that earlier, Greg, that making sure they actually fit within your personnel culture piece. Lindsay, last question. Lindsay asked a good question earlier. Should you focus measurement on activity or revenue targets, or both? And what are the top 3 KPIs? I'll just dive in really quickly on that before you guys give your thoughts. I think if you're starting a new program, it has to be on activity and quality of conversation, because revenue targets will come later and you can't measure them for the first 3, 6, 9 months consistently and well anyway. So for me, I'm looking at level of activity and quality of conversation as the 2 things that I want to measure straight away. There's some other things that's ancillary, quality of data, all those sorts of things, but number of calls, the percentage of calls that connect with a decision maker, and the percentage of those that turn into what we call a positive conversation. So either a pipeline, look, send me some information, let's have a second conversation, I'm keen, or a meeting. Those are my obvious things that I look for. And then I'm listening to some calls to hear that the messaging is being delivered the right way, handling objections well, engaging at the right level. Anything you'd add to those things if there's additional things, guys?
I personally would say, judge me on the revenue side of things if I'm the one that's responsible, and I will target and try and motivate people by activity. So I think the top 3 KPIs I'd probably put down and would look to try and incentivize. So whether it's proposals, sales qualified leads, closed business, which is probably a little further down the track, but how are you rewarding and incentivizing the SDRs? And how does that play out? That's probably how you want to align your KPIs as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like Owen and Neil on the leading indicators, not lagging indicators, especially at first. But the one that goes, I think, quite often missed. So just to give you a bit of concept, we run 2 prospecting lists per rep, almost like an A and a B list. So like Monday would be A, Tuesday would be B, A, B, A, B, A, B. About 60 to 100 organizations in each for each person. The big thing that we find is that the freshness of new contacts and new organizations within that list is the defining factor. So if you can measure new contacts mapped or new companies mapped and new companies contacted and prospected, that is a massively important KPI that a lot of people miss, I think.
I think that's fair. That gets us into another debate, which we will have to have another day, about whether reps should be building their own data or not, which we all have different views on. But I think that's a really interesting point too. Guys, time-wise, we need to wrap up now. I think it's been an amazing conversation. Genuinely, I think we've brought some really good points to the forefront, and the feedback coming in on the chat is really positive. Some fantastic points and ideas there for people to consider. Just as a bit of a takeaway, I'll just remind everybody that there are 2 things that you can take away physically from today's session. If you want them, you just have to connect with us, connect with me or Neil on LinkedIn, and we'll happily share these with you. But you'll also, if you've registered the event, get an email coming through with A, a link to the recording, and B, with the ability to download these 2 things. The first is a cold call messaging template. So it'll give you the ability to see some options that you can take to market in terms of your messaging and how to write a cold call script, whether we use the script word for word or whether it's a call guide, I think is another open topic. But certainly having some kind of guide to start from if you've never done it before will be useful. And there's some ideas that we use with some success in there. And the second thing is a 2-year forecasting tool that we can punch in some of those KPIs that we talked about today, guys, where we have number of calls made, number of conversations, likely conversion rates into meeting, likely meeting to sale or opportunity ratios, average sales value, average sales length, and it will give you the ability to predict when you're going to start to see a return. And I think more importantly, how much you're going to need to spend before the numbers start to come up and how long that's going to take. And that tool is something that we use with our clients coming on board and in our sales process, and has been invaluable in educating our potential and our current clients around what to expect. When it comes to stakeholder management, we now use that tool for our own new programs and marketing activity. So if you want to access those, they're free to take them. And you can do that by getting in touch with us, or just wait for that email, and that will come out to everybody. Before we wrap up, though, Greg, I'll come to you first. And barring the fact that you're hiring SDRs, any final thoughts or summaries that you would like to share with us?
Just if you are going to do it, whether you're a founder or you're somebody going in early to a company, just make sure it's the right time, the right setup, and that the money's there to back it up, because it's not going to answer every prayer you've ever had within the first 6 months.
Neil?
Salespeople love to speak. Get as much advice, and they, all you need to do is pick up the phone to people who've done it, and they will willingly tell you all the lessons learned. This is what I did. Don't do that. That's absolutely invaluable. Don't think you've got to do it from scratch. You can get so many good people giving advice.
And I think for me, the summary here is that you have to plan. I know it sounds really simple, but you have to sit down. You have to think about everything you're going to need to spend, how long you're going to need to spend it for, and that needs to go in front of everybody that needs to be involved in the decision. And you need to know what it's likely to look like before you hit the trigger on this, because the worst thing is that you invest in it. And we've just said, all of us concur that it's a minimum of 6 months, probably more like 12 plus, before you get a return or before you see a consistent, it works. So you've got to be in for that journey. And there is no point in going into it having zero tolerance for failure, and 4 months in pulling the pin, 8 months in pulling the pin. And that's whether it's in-house or externally. If you're going to build Outbound, you have to commit and go through those waves of failure to get to success and learn as you go. And I think that's come out a lot today. And the other thing is, I love that phrase, plan for it to take twice as long as you think it's going to and cost twice as much. And if it's still a good decision, you're good to go. If it's not, maybe think about it again. And I think that's a good way to end today. Gents, thank you so much for your input. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Love talking to you both about this sort of stuff. Feel like we could have done 2 hours instead of 1. Guys that have added questions and comments and things on the chat, thank you for your input. To say the recording will be coming out shortly. And I think we are good to go for the day. Any other thoughts before we wrap up, gents?
All good, thank you.
All good, thank you.
That's good. Then we will end the broadcast there. And get in touch with Greg if you need help with data. And actually, Greg, on that, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn, or from the amount of recruiter calls I'm getting at the moment, I think my mobile's publicly available in 1 or more data sources, so you might be able to find it there. So whatever works for you, really, guys. Whatever. Love it. And if you need help or advice around this, obviously we outsource SDR, but we also consult with people we're building internally. So if there's any support people need on that, by all means, talk to us. Gents, thanks very much for your time. Enjoy your afternoon, and we'll end the broadcast there. Cool.
Thank you.
See you soon, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.